She went into labor under the beating sun, abandoned beside a dying horse cart with 4 children crying and no water left. But the man who found her that day wasn't just a rancher. He was hope. The pain struck hard, deep, low, and cruel, and Martha barely had time to brace herself before the world blurred around the edges. Her knees hit the dry earth with a crack that made her eldest scream. "Mama!" 12-year-old Clara cried, dropping to her side as dust billowed from the cracked desert floor. The wagon, once pulled by a stubborn, overworked mule, stood crooked now, axles snapped from the rocky descent. The mule itself lay still a few paces off, breath shallow, foam crusted at its mouth. It wouldn't last the night. Neither might she. "Mama, please, what do we do?" Clara asked again, her voice rising into panic. Martha sucked in a ragged breath and clutched her belly, slick with sweat, heavy with the baby that was coming too soon, or right on time, depending on how cruel the Lord was feeling today. Behind Clara, 8-year-old Wesley held little Janie's hand tightly. The 4-year-old was crying but too dehydrated for tears. Todd, only 6, sat stiff with fear beside the wagon, silent but trembling. They'd been walking for hours. No water, no shade, no help, and no husband. He'd left them at sunrise. Said he was going to find the nearest town for supplies and a doctor. But he hadn't taken the canteen, or the map, or the good horse. He'd taken the money. She'd known the moment the sun crested the bluff and she realized he was gone, that he wasn't coming back. Eldon had abandoned her. She had 4 children and another on the way, and Eldon, her husband of 14 years, had simply walked away. Clara had seen it too, the truth written in the silence, but she hadn't said it aloud, not yet. "I need you to stay calm," Martha rasped, barely able to speak. "We need shade, something." Wesley was already pulling the wagon's blanket over to the tallest scrub bush nearby, creating a sagging canopy. Todd scrambled to help, and Clara helped guide her mother beneath it. The sun had scorched her scalp and shoulders, her lips were cracked, and her legs had begun to swell hours ago. But it wasn't the heat that scared her most. It was the wetness now soaking the inside of her skirt, the deep, spreading pain, the unmistakable knowledge that the baby wasn't going to wait. "Mama, you're bleeding," Clara whispered. Martha gripped her daughter's hand. "It's the baby. I need you to stay strong, take care of the others." "How?" the girl cried. "I don't know what to do." "Just hold them close, keep them in the shade, if something happens to me." "No," Clara snapped, "don't say that." But Martha wasn't saying it, not really. She was preparing her. Because they were alone, and help wasn't coming. Until it did. It started as a tremor in the ground. So faint at first she thought it was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. But then Janie lifted her head and whispered, "Mama, do you hear it?" A moment later, the sound became clear hooves. Not just one, several. Then a voice, sharp and close. "Whoa, whoa there, girl, someone's down there." A shadow fell across them. Clara turned toward the light, shielding her eyes, and saw a rider dismounting from a dark bay. He was older, mid-40s, maybe, with a weather-worn face, gray at the temples, and a long coat streaked with trail dust. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at Martha, then at the children, then at the blood soaking her skirts. He handed the reins to another rider behind him, a boy, maybe 17, and knelt beside her. "I'm Daniel Hart," he said softly. "I've got water, a wagon up the ridge, and a wife who's helped deliver more babies than anyone west of the Red." Martha blinked up at him. "You real?" she breathed. He gave a half-smile. "Real as dust and debt, ma'am. Let's get you off this dirt." Everything after that came in flashes. Hands lifting her, the children crying, Daniel barking orders to his boy Micah, a canteen pressed to her lips, the sting of movement as they shifted her onto a pallet in the wagon bed, Clara holding Janie tight, Wesley clambering up beside his mother, refusing to let go. The trail blurred past, then the sky. Then the pain again. And then nothing. She woke to the smell of lavender. It didn't make sense. She hadn't smelled anything in days. But it was real, lavender, warm cloth and soap. Her eyes opened slowly, a ceiling of wooden beams above her, curtains fluttering, voices murmuring nearby. She wasn't in the desert anymore. "Mama!" Clara's voice, close, frantic. Martha turned her head with a groan and saw her children gathered at her bedside, wide-eyed and dusty, but safe. Clara clutched her hand. Wesley leaned close. Janie was asleep on her pillow. And in the doorway stood Daniel, hat in hand. "I hope you don't mind," he said softly. "We brought you to my ranch, closest place with what you needed." Martha tried to speak, but her throat caught. "The baby." Daniel nodded. "Your son's asleep in the cradle by the window. He's small but strong. Your daughter Clara helped my wife. She's the reason you're both here now." Tears welled in Martha's eyes. She reached for Clara, who immediately hugged her tightly, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. For the first time in days, Martha let herself cry. In the days that followed, Daniel Hart's ranch became something more than a shelter. His wife, Miriam, cared for Martha and the newborn, whom they named Ezra. The children were fed, clothed, given beds and tasks to do. It was a calm Martha hadn't known in years. But with calm came memory. And with memory, fear. Eldon was still out there. And if he found out she'd survived, if he came back and tried to claim them, Martha wouldn't let that happen. But she also knew she couldn't fight him alone. That night, while the children slept and the lantern burned low, she asked Daniel the question that had been burning since the day he found them in the dust. "Why did you stop?" Daniel sat across from her, polishing a boot, shoulders wide and hands rough from years on the trail. He looked up slowly. "I lost my wife and daughter 7 years ago," he said. "Wagon accident. I was behind them on the trail, too far to stop it. By the time I got there," he swallowed, "there was nothing left to save." Martha didn't breathe. "So now," he continued, "when I see someone left behind, I don't ride past, not ever." Silence held between them. Then she nodded once, "Thank you." Daniel rose, set the boot down, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. "You're not just welcome here, Martha," he said. "You and your kids, you belong if you'll have us." Then he was gone. She lay back slowly, heart pounding. Belong. She hadn't heard that word in years. And she wasn't sure she believed it yet. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to try. The days that followed were slow and quiet, the kind that tricked you into thinking you might have dreamed the pain. But the ache in Martha's hips was real, the soreness in her hands from cradling the newborn every night, and the dull burn in her chest each time she remembered what Eldon had said before riding off for supplies. He never meant to fetch. "You always were too soft, Martha. Let's see how long softness survives out here." And then he'd vanished with their last coin, the second-best horse, and none of the children's things. But softness had survived. Because Clara had carried Janie when her legs gave out. Because Wesley had stood between them and every rattling bush in that canyon, certain it was danger. Because Todd had never let go of Martha's skirt, not once, even as she bled into the earth and whispered through gritted teeth for them to keep going. And now they were all here, alive, fed, safe. But safety, Martha had learned, was a delicate thing, a bubble one sharp moment away from bursting. She hadn't told Daniel everything yet. She couldn't. Not when the memory of Eldon's last glare still burned behind her eyelids. But she would, eventually. She had to. Daniel and his wife Miriam didn't ask questions, not yet. Maybe they knew she'd been through the kind of storm a person couldn't talk about until the winds had fully passed. Maybe they saw enough in her hollowed eyes, in Clara's stiff protectiveness, in Wesley's silent stares at any man who passed too close to the barn. Miriam simply brewed her teas, rubbed warm oils on Martha's sore joints, and passed no judgment. The woman's hands were calloused but gentle, and her prayers before every meal rang so steady that even Todd had begun to bow his head without needing a nudge. Ezra, Martha's newborn, was small but strong, slept in bursts, wailed like a fire when hungry, and clung to her skin like he'd known, even in the womb, how close he'd come to never drawing breath. Daniel came by most evenings, checking the boy's progress, hauling water or helping Clara gather eggs. He never lingered long, never hovered. But he always looked directly at Martha, eyes steady, voice low. "How you holding up?" he'd ask. She never gave him more than a quiet, "I'm managing." Until one night she didn't. She was sitting on the porch steps, Ezra nestled against her chest, when Daniel came by. The moon was high and pale, brushing silver over the barn roof. The air smelled like dust and pine. He sat 2 steps down from her, far enough not to intrude. "You don't sleep much," he said. "Hard to," she replied, "with this one waking up every 2 hours like clockwork." Daniel smiled faintly. Micah was the same. Miriam used to sleep sitting up for the first 3 months. There was a pause, long and soft. Then Martha said it. "I think he was trying to kill me." Daniel didn't flinch, just turned slightly toward her. "My husband, Eldon. The bleeding started days before he left. He saw it, knew it wasn't right. I was already laboring and he told me I was making it up for attention." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. "He left knowing I might die, knowing our kids would be alone in the desert. He didn't just leave us, Daniel, he meant to." Her voice cracked at the end, a splinter in the quiet. Daniel leaned forward slowly, elbows on knees. "I don't know what to say that make that less ugly," he said. "But I will say this, you got 5 lives to your name now, yours and 4 kids. That's more than most men ever manage. That's strength, not softness." Martha looked down at Ezra. He was blinking up at her, hand curled around a button on her dress. "Feels like survival," she whispered, "not strength." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Daniel murmured. The next morning, trouble came. Not thunder and guns, not yet. Just a name. Micah came back from the market with a story he hadn't meant to overhear. Some fellow in Halford was asking after a woman with 4 kids, he told Daniel as they shoveled grain in the barn. Said she ran off with his money, claimed she tried to kill him. Daniel froze. Did he give a name? "No, sir, but he was mad. Kept saying she took what wasn't hers and ruined him." Daniel set the shovel down. "What did he look like?" Micah shrugged. "Average brown hair, short beard, kind of scar on his chin, I think." Daniel's fists clenched. He hadn't seen Eldon, but he didn't need to. The shape of the man was already forming in his mind. And now he had to decide what to do with that shape. Martha knew something was wrong the moment she saw Daniel come up the path with his shoulders set too tight. He waited until the children were out back with Micah before saying anything. "You need to tell me the truth," he said, "all of it." Martha closed the door and leaned against it. "You heard." He nodded. "I need to know if it's him, if he's coming." Her eyes didn't waver. "Yes, it's him, and I don't doubt he's looking." Daniel exhaled through his nose. "Then we prepare." Martha blinked. "You're not sending us away." "Where?" She didn't answer. "This is your home now," Daniel said, "and no man like that is gonna take it from you." The finality in his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He meant it. The ranch changed after that. Micah reinforced the windows. Miriam packed medical supplies near the kitchen. Daniel made sure Martha knew where the rifle was stored and how to use it. She practiced shooting behind the barn with Clara watching, wide-eyed. "You ever shot a gun before?" Daniel asked her. "Once," Martha said. "After Wesley got bit by a rattler, I didn't aim so much as pray it'd hit." Daniel chuckled. "Sometimes that's enough." But at night she barely slept. Not from fear, though that was there, but from something deeper, a pressure in her chest that told her something was coming. And it did. On the fourth night, Clara saw him first. She was out checking the chickens with Micah when she froze mid-step. "Mr. Hart," she whispered. Daniel stepped onto the porch. And there he was. Eldon, sitting atop a mud-spattered horse at the edge of the path. He looked thinner, paler, mouth twisted into something that might have once been charm. "Well now," Eldon said, tipping his hat, "ain't this a warm welcome?" Clara backed up. Micah stepped between her and the man. Daniel's voice was low and steady. "You've got 5 seconds to turn around." Eldon just laughed. "You got something belongs to me." "No, I got 5 people who don't belong to you anymore." "She's my wife." "Was." "She took my money. She took your children, your name, your punishment." Eldon's eyes narrowed. "Where is she?" Daniel didn't answer. But from the house, Martha stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, baby in a sling across her chest. "I'm here." Eldon sneered. "Still bleeding, are you?" Martha raised the gun. "No," she said, "but you might be in a minute." The hammer clicked back. The wind stilled. And for the first time in his life, Eldon Crowley realized he wasn't the biggest force in the room anymore. Because she wasn't soft. She was steel. And she had nothing left to lose. Eldon didn't move, not at first. Just sat there on his horse, mouth curled in that familiar sneer, though it looked less certain now, more like a mask he didn't know how to take off. Martha did lower the rifle. Ezra stirred softly in the sling across her chest, but she didn't glance down. Her eyes were fixed on the man who'd once been her husband, her tormentor, the man who had left her and her children to die under a burning sky. Behind her, the screen door creaked as Miriam stepped out, shotgun in hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. One look at the quiet determination in her face made it clear Martha wasn't alone. "I came for what's mine," Eldon said at last, his voice louder now, rising to fill the space around them like he needed the sound to remind himself he still had power. "She's still my wife. That boy's got my blood. I've got every right." Daniel stepped forward, slow, deliberate, putting himself just slightly ahead of Martha. "You lost your rights," he said, "the day you abandoned them in the dirt." Eldon's eyes snapped to Daniel. "And you're what, some white knight? You think sheltering her makes you a hero. You don't know what she's like. She'll bleed you dry." Daniel didn't flinch. "The only thing bleeding around here will be you if you don't ride out of here now." Eldon glanced past them, toward the barn, the open land beyond, as if considering his odds, but even he could count. 2 rifles pointed his way and no allies in sight. The moment stretched too long. Then he smiled, and it was all teeth and poison. "This ain't over," he said, turning his horse. "You can't hide out here forever." He rode off without another word, dust rising behind him like a warning. Martha did lower the rifle until he was out of sight. Only then did her knees buckle slightly. Daniel reached out instinctively, catching her elbow, steadying her. She didn't pull away. Ezra let out a soft cry. Martha looked down at him and then toward the horizon. "He'll come back," she said, her voice quiet. "He won't stop, not until—" "He won't make it past the fence next time," Daniel said. "Not alive." The next 2 days passed in a haze of tension. The air itself felt heavier, like the sky was pressing down. Clara kept close to Martha, barely speaking. Wesley started sleeping with a hatchet under his pillow, though he didn't say it aloud. Todd clung to Miriam's skirts and refused to go outside without someone holding his hand. Even Ezra sensed the shift. His cries came sharper, quicker, and only quieted when Martha pressed him to her chest and whispered low prayers. Daniel didn't sleep much. He took to walking the property at night, rifle slung across his back, boots crunching quietly over the hard dirt. He reinforced the barn doors, checked the locks twice a day, and posted Micah at the front gate with a warning bell rigged from an old mule harness. Every time a bird flew too fast overhead, every time a tree branch snapped in the wind, the entire ranch seemed to hold its breath. But Martha didn't ask to leave. She stayed. She cleaned, she cooked. She nursed Ezra and taught Clara how to sew a straight stitch with what little thread they had left. She helped Daniel with the animals, her body still sore but her hands steady. And every evening when the sun sank and shadows stretched long, she sat by the fire and told the children stories. About rivers that sang in springtime, about stars that guided lost wanderers, about mothers who could build hope from nothing but dust and prayer. And Daniel listened. He listened more than he spoke, eyes resting on the way she held Ezra, the way she braided Clara's hair with care, the way her voice softened when she said the children's names. He didn't speak of the future, but the idea of it hung thick between them, unspoken, unnamed but not unnoticed. On the third night after Eldon's visit, Clara spoke the words no one else would. "Are we gonna die?" She asked it over a bowl of stew, voice barely more than a breath. Martha didn't answer right away. She set her spoon down, wiped Ezra's chin, and looked straight at her daughter. "No," she said, "not here, not now, and not like that." "But what if he brings others?" Wesley asked, eyes narrow and sharp. "Then he'll learn what a real family looks like when it fights back," Daniel said from the far side of the table. The children looked at him, then at Martha, and in that shared silence something settled. They weren't alone anymore. The warning bell rang at dawn. It wasn't loud, just a jangle of rusted metal against wood, but it was enough. Daniel was already halfway down the stairs when Micah burst into the house. "3 riders," he said, panting. "Coming fast, one's him." Martha handed Ezra to Miriam without a word and grabbed the rifle from behind the door. "You stay with the kids," she told Miriam. Daniel didn't argue. He slung his own rifle over his shoulder and stepped onto the porch just as the first rider came into view. It was Eldon. Behind him were 2 men, both younger, both armed. One carried a shotgun. The other had a blade strapped to his leg and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. They stopped at the gate. Eldon dismounted, slow, casual, like this was just another visit. Daniel walked forward, stopping 5 feet from the fence. Martha stood beside him. "This how you solve problems now," Daniel called out, "bringing thugs to do your talking." Eldon shrugged. "You said she wasn't mine, so I brought witnesses. Thought maybe it was time the law had a say." "You don't care about the law." "Maybe not," Eldon said. "But these boys, they're real fond of order, and I paid 'em good." Martha stepped forward, raising her voice. "You paid them with the money you stole from your own family, with the last of our savings. You paid them to hunt down the woman you left to die." Eldon's grin faltered. "You ain't got proof of any of that," he said. "I've got scars," she snapped. "I've got 4 witnesses who watched you ride off, and I've got a newborn you denied before he even had a name." The man with the shotgun shifted. His expression changed, just slightly, but enough. Daniel saw it. "These boys ain't law," Daniel said. "They're hired dogs, and they just learned who's feeding them scraps." "You gonna shoot me?" Eldon sneered, "in front of them?" "I don't need to," Daniel replied, "but I will." Then Clara's voice rang out. "She's not yours." Everyone turned. Clara stood just inside the fence, hands balled into fists, face flushed with something between fear and fury. "You gave her away. You gave us away. You don't get to come back now like nothing happened." Eldon looked at her, eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're talking about, girl." "She knows enough," Martha said. The man with the shotgun glanced at his partner. Then he looked at Martha, at Clara, at Wesley and Todd now standing behind Miriam. And then he backed up. "I don't shoot women," he said, "or kids, not for this." He turned his horse. The blade man cursed under his breath, but didn't argue. That left Eldon alone. The silence was brutal. "I'll come back," he hissed. "You can't keep me away forever." "Then come back in a coffin," Martha said. Eldon stared a second longer, then turned, rode away for the last time. No one spoke until he was gone. And when the dust cleared, Daniel turned to Martha, voice soft. "You're not just surviving anymore," he said. She didn't speak. She just reached down, took Clara's hand and stepped back toward the house, toward warmth, toward safety, toward something that might finally become a life again. The days that followed were quiet, but no one mistook it for peace. Not yet. It was the kind of quiet that came after a hard frost, still, brittle, but not quite safe. Everyone moved a little slower, spoke a little softer, but there was breath in the silence now, not just fear. Life had crept in through the cracks. It hadn't taken over yet, but it was making a claim. Martha found herself waking before the sun again, not from nightmares this time, but from habit. Ezra stirred in the basket beside her bed, eyes opening to the faint blue of morning. She lifted him gently, pressing her lips to his warm forehead. For a moment she just held him, his breath soft against her collarbone. Then the creak of footsteps on the stairs broke the stillness. It was Clara, barefoot, hair tangled, a sleepy look on her face that reminded Martha of years before Eldon had twisted everything. Clara crossed the room and leaned against her mother's shoulder. "He didn't come back," she whispered. "No," Martha said, "he didn't." "Will he?" Martha thought about it. Thought about the way he rode off, jaw tight, promises sharp as knives in the dust behind him. She knew Eldon. Knew how deep his bitterness ran, how much of his pride was built on control. But she also knew something else now. He was weaker than he let on, and she was stronger than he ever expected. "If he does," she said, "we'll be ready." Clara nodded and slipped her hand into her mother's, small fingers curling tight. "Okay." Downstairs, the house was already stirring. Todd was helping Miriam beat the dust out of old curtains, giggling every time he missed and caught his own foot. Wesley was out back, chopping kindling with Micah. He was getting stronger. Daniel had taken note of the way the boy gripped the axe now, not just with brute force but control. A quiet kind of growth, shaped by necessity, sure, but growth all the same. Daniel, meanwhile, had been making changes. He never said it outright, but Martha could feel it. He moved with purpose now. Fixed the corral fencing without waiting for anyone to ask. Brought extra flour from town without being told they were low. He even repaired the windmill pump, though it took 3 days of sweat and muttered prayers to do it. He didn't say much about it, but Martha saw the way he watched the children, how his gaze lingered on Clara when she laughed, or the way he reached out to steady Todd without thinking. He wasn't trying to step in as a father, not yet, but the thought lived in the air between them, half-shaped and tender. It came to a head one evening just after supper. The children were asleep, Miriam had gone to her room, and Martha was sweeping ashes from the hearth when Daniel spoke. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked, not looking up from his seat. Martha paused, straightened, set the broom aside. "I used to," she said. "And now?" "I don't know. I thought the world was something I had to run from. Turns out, maybe I just needed a place to stop running." Daniel nodded. "This place ain't much, but it's solid." "It's safe," she said softly. "That's more than I had for a long time." He glanced at her then, his face in shadow, but his voice steady. "You and the kids, you got a place here if you want it. Not out of pity, not because you need it, because maybe we need it too." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt and added a log to the fire, the flames catching with a hiss. Only after the crackle filled the room again did she speak. "Let's see if spring still comes," she said. "Then we'll talk about staying." Spring did come. slowly, almost like it was testing them. But the ground softened. The snowmelt fed the creek. Buds began to show on the trees. The wind changed, not warm yet, but not cruel either. Ezra began to sit up on his own, eyes curious and wide. Clara started teaching Todd his letters. Wesley caught a rabbit in a snare he built himself and beamed like a man twice his age. Then came the letter. It arrived tucked in the folds of the flour sack Daniel brought back from town. Addressed to no one in particular, just a name scrawled in thick, angry ink. Martha Reed. She opened it on the porch, the others busy with chores. She read it once, then again. Then she folded it and slipped it into her apron. Daniel found her there an hour later, sitting stiff as the rocking chair beneath her. He said nothing, just sat beside her. "Was him," she said after a long moment. "Said he's headed west, said I'll see him again." Daniel didn't speak. Martha turned toward him. "I believe him." "Do you want to run?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm tired of running." He looked out across the field. The sky stretched pink and blue above it. "Then we make sure he never comes back." They prepared. Not like they were preparing for war, more like they were building something that would last. Daniel brought in 2 more hands from a neighboring town, older men, quiet and sharp-eyed, brothers who had fought in the war and didn't mind hard work. Micah dug deeper into the fence lines, added iron nails where wood once split. Martha began stockpiling food, drying fruit, preserving vegetables, planting early when the frost allowed. They built a smokehouse. They buried a second rifle near the barn. Wesley learned how to fire it. Clara asked if she could learn too. Martha didn't say no. Evenings grew longer, days fuller. The children thrived, but no one forgot the threat still hanging on the horizon. Eldon wasn't the kind to vanish. He was the kind who waited, who came back just when you thought it was safe to breathe again. That day came on the first truly warm afternoon of May. Clara saw the rider first. He was just a speck on the ridge, but his hat was familiar, the horse too, and the way he didn't rush, it was the same kind of slow menace that had haunted her dreams. Martha called everyone inside, locked the doors. Daniel stood on the porch, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. Eldon rode into view like a man who owned the land. Except this time, he wasn't alone. 2 wagons followed. One of them had women in the back, bound, faces bruised. The other carried supplies more than any man should own without questions. Behind them came a small group of riders, 6 men in total, guns at their sides. Some looked bored, some looked mean. Daniel cursed under his breath. "This ain't a visit." "He's moving," Martha said, stepping beside him, trying to plant himself like a king. Daniel nodded. "Then we dig him out by the roots." They didn't have time to build a plan, didn't need one. What they had was fire and each other. And this time, when Eldon stepped off his horse, Martha met him at the gate with her children behind her, Ezra on her hip, Clara to her right, Wesley and Todd holding hands. Miriam stepped out of the barn, shotgun ready. Daniel moved last, slow, calm, certain. Eldon opened his mouth, but Martha spoke first. No more letters, no more threats, no more pretending. He narrowed his eyes. "This land's mine, got the deed, bought it last week." "You bought dust," Daniel said. "We built the roots." Eldon's gaze drifted to the kids. "Last chance," he said. "Come with me, Martha, or they watch this place burn." "No," she said. He blinked. "No," he repeated. She stepped forward, fire in her voice. "You lost me the moment you left me bleeding in the desert. You lost the kids the moment they learned what strength looks like. You lost your place in this world when you gave up being a man." He reached for his belt. But Daniel was faster. One shot cracked the sky. Eldon's hat flew. Not his head. A warning. "Next one don't miss," Daniel said, voice cold. The riders behind Eldon shifted, looked at each other. One turned his horse. Then another. The man with the wagons cursed, spat, and turned too. Eldon stood alone again, just like before. Martha didn't flinch. "You come back," she said, "and you'll die here." For a long, terrible second, Eldon said nothing. Then he climbed back onto his horse and rode into the wind. This time, no one watched him go, because this time they already knew. He'd lost. The wind carried no dust that evening, just the scent of tilled soil and blooming grass as the ranch breathed out a sigh it hadn't dared release in years. After Eldon disappeared beyond the horizon, Martha's knees threatened to give out. She didn't let them. Not while Clara was watching, not while Daniel still stood with the rifle gripped in steady hands. But when the porch door shut behind them and the children were ushered back inside, her hands trembled. Daniel saw it. He didn't say anything, just set the rifle down gently and crossed the room, taking her hands in his, firm enough to anchor, soft enough not to press. For a long moment they stood in silence, the fire in the hearth low but steady, echoing their breaths. Her fingers twitched against his. "He meant it," she whispered. "He was ready to kill me in front of my children." Daniel's jaw tensed, and he would have died trying. "But it's not over," she said, not as a question but as a certainty. He didn't argue. "No, men like him don't leave wounds half-healed. He'll come back, when he thinks you're weak again, when he's got something worse planned." "And what if next time he does bring more men, the kind who won't ride off at a warning shot?" Daniel exhaled through his nose and turned to the fire. "Then we don't just defend, we prepare." Preparation came quietly, as most revolutions do. The first order of business was legal. Martha and Daniel rode into town 3 days later, papers tucked under his arm and tension strung tight through their shoulders. The land hadn't been officially transferred to Daniel, though he'd lived and worked it for nearly 10 years. Eldon, in his petty rage, had found some back-alley lawyer to register a deed under his name. But there were errors in the documents, missing dates, a witness signature suspiciously similar to Eldon's own. It was sloppy. Martha didn't ask how Daniel knew the judge. She only saw the way the man shook Daniel's hand without hesitation, the way he squinted over the paperwork and muttered, typical Crowley nonsense. In under an hour, the judge had written a new deed, one signed and sealed in public record, declaring the ranch under joint ownership of Daniel Hart and Martha Reed. No longer squatters, no longer prey. By the time they returned home, the sky was beginning to smudge with the soft blue of oncoming dusk. The kids ran to meet them, Ezra wiggling in Miriam's arms with a happy squeal. Clara clung to Martha longer than usual that night, whispering, "Are we safe now?" "We're safer," Martha replied, "and getting stronger." The weeks that followed were the kind of busy that made days feel short and nights far too brief. Spring deepened, coaxing blossoms from bare branches and luring birds back from the edge of winter. The ranch swelled with rhythm and sweat. Micah took over the east fence, rebuilding it from scratch with barbed wire and treated posts. Todd shadowed him with a hammer twice his size, every tap a declaration of purpose. Miriam handled the house, but in a quieter way, preserving food in the cellar, teaching Clara how to stretch bread dough without tearing it, guiding Wesley through the strange, stubborn path of learning to read. Daniel began expanding the barn, adding a loft and second stall for livestock they didn't yet own, as if hope were something you could nail into timber. And Martha, she worked the land. The vegetable plots had sat unused for 2 years. She tore them back to the soil, hands raw from weeding and tilling. She planted late but thoroughly. Potatoes, carrots, beans. Tomatoes if the frost stayed off. Her back ached every night, her knees buckled more than once, but when she looked out across those furrows, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to want before. A future. But safety is a fickle companion. The letter came at night. No postmark, no messenger, just a folded scrap nailed to the porch. Daniel found it first, The hammer mark in the wood was clean, professional. He held the note to the lamp. 1 fire and 6 bullets. Choose who you save. He said nothing when Martha joined him, just handed her the paper. She read it, then crumpled it, threw it into the hearth. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Daniel nodded but didn't speak. Because fear wasn't the issue now. It was vengeance. They set up watches that night. Daniel sat by the door with a rifle, Micah in the barn with his shotgun. Martha didn't sleep. She lay between her children and watched the shadows dance across the ceiling. At dawn, nothing had changed. No fire, no bullets, but the message was received. 2 days later, the creek water turned murky. Clara was the first to notice it when she went to rinse the laundry. She came back pale, the water in the bucket brown as rust. Daniel followed her down to the bank and returned with a grim look. Dead coyote, gutted upstream, tossed in like bait. Trying to break us, Martha said. Daniel didn't disagree, but he's close. It was the first time he admitted it out loud. The next morning, hoofprints were found near the chicken coop, only a few feet from where Wesley had sat the evening before, whittling a piece of driftwood. Whoever it was had walked the perimeter of the house, listening, watching, waiting. They made a decision that night. We can't just wait for him to strike, Martha said. We need to end it. Daniel's expression was unreadable. You're talking about hunting a man who knows this land, who rides with guns and pride. It's not a fair fight. Wasn't fair when he left me in the desert to die. Wasn't fair when he rode in here with 6 men and chained women in a wagon. I'm done asking for fair. Daniel studied her for a long time. Then we do it smart. We find him, but on our terms. The next day, Daniel and Micah rode out. They followed the old cattle trail east toward the foothills, land Eldon had known since childhood. It was rocky, hard to track, but the signs were there. Fresh manure, a broken branch too clean to be weathered, the smell of tobacco near an old camp. 3 hours in, they found a boot print near a dead tree, too fresh to ignore. Daniel crouched, studying it. That's him. How do you know? Daniel stood, because he never learned how to walk quiet. They followed the trail until dusk, then turned back. Didn't want to draw him out too early. Better to watch, better to build. Martha had prepared supplies, bedrolls, rations, water skins. Wesley had drawn a map from memory, marking the ridges where Eldon once took them hunting, places he bragged about as if they were his own kingdom. That night they circled around a plan. Daniel would take Micah and one of the hired men, Lyle, the quiet one with the burned scar on his forearm. Martha would stay behind with Miriam and the children, armed, ready. We're not hoping for peace anymore, Daniel said. We're digging it out of the ground. Before dawn, he kissed Ezra's forehead, shook Wesley's hand and nodded to Clara. When he turned to Martha, he paused, not out of doubt, but because there was too much in that moment to fit into words. You come back, she whispered. I will. You promise. His eyes didn't waver. You already know. He rode off into the dark with 2 men behind him, and a heart heavy with something more than duty. And Martha watched until the trees swallowed them. The waiting began again. But it was different this time. No longer prey, no longer afraid, Martha moved like a woman preparing not for survival, but for legacy. She taught Wesley how to oil the rifle, showed Clara how to reload the shotgun, taught Todd to listen, really listen for footsteps in the dark. She stood watch each night, alone, daring the silence to break. And every morning, she lit a fire in the front yard. Not to keep warm, but to say we're still here. And every night it burned. The fire was more than flame now. It was defiance. It was warning. It was prayer. and Martha kept it lit with the same discipline she'd once poured into making stew with scraps and sewing mittens out of flour sacks. The children began to understand. Clara volunteered for night watch. Wesley carved a wooden rifle for Ezra so the baby could stand guard too. There was no illusion about safety anymore, only the decision to stand firm until the end. But with each sunrise that came without news, the unease grew heavier. On the fourth day, as she peeled potatoes with Miriam near the well, a sound carried over the fields, faint at first, like distant thunder rolling under a clear sky. Hoofbeats. Martha stood before the knife had even dropped from her hands. Miriam rose slower, holding Ezra tightly. There, over the crest of the hill, 3 riders. Her chest froze. Daniel, Micah, and Lyle. No limp in their gait, no blood she could see. They made it back. Martha rushed forward, skirts heavy around her legs. She met Daniel halfway, grabbing the reins before he'd even dismounted. He didn't smile, not yet, but the set of his jaw was looser, his posture less coiled. "We found him," he said. "Where?" "Cabin near Split Ridge. He's not alone, 4 men, maybe 5, armed and planning something." "Soon?" Daniel nodded, "Real soon." "What now?" "Now we make the next move." Daniel didn't believe in dragging things out. If they were going to take the fight to Eldon, it had to be swift and final. No taunts, no threats, no long rides back and forth across enemy land, just precision. The plan came together that night. Clara traced the cabin's layout in the dirt with a stick as Daniel described it: porch on the south side, windows facing west, barn out back where the horses were kept. He marked entry points, assigned positions. "I'll take the front," he said. "Micah goes for the horses. Lyle flanks the west window." "You trust Lyle that much?" Martha asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "He's quiet, steady, doesn't ask questions he doesn't need answered." "And me?" He looked at her. "You stay here and protect the kids." Martha's spine stiffened. "That's not." He raised a hand, not to silence her, just to steady her. "If anything happens to us, they'll come here next. Someone has to be ready." She hated that he was right. But she nodded. They left again at dawn. No fanfare, just saddled horses and determined eyes. This time the children didn't cry. Miriam hugged Daniel like he was already halfway to heaven. Clara kissed his cheek and said, "Come back with all your parts." Even Wesley stayed quiet, holding Ezra in one arm and the wooden rifle in the other. Martha stood by the gate, fingers white around the post. And Daniel looked back only once, just long enough to meet her gaze. Then they vanished into the trees. The wait was longer this time, longer not by hours but by weight. Midday came and went, then afternoon, then dusk. No riders, no sign. The fire was lit again. Martha added extra logs, watched the smoke climb. Something about it didn't feel right. The air was too still, the silence too complete. That's when Clara called out from the porch. "Ma!" Martha turned. A figure on the horizon. Riderless, walking. Limping. Micah. He collapsed at the gate, dirt in his mouth, blood on his sleeve, one arm dangling uselessly at his side. Martha and Miriam hauled him inside. Clara brought water. Wesley fetched rags. They worked in silence, each movement sharp with dread. "What happened?" Martha demanded. Micah's lips were cracked. It was a setup. "What do you mean?" "There weren't 5 men in that cabin. There were 8, waiting." "Where's Daniel?" Micah's head rolled to the side. "Taken." The word dropped like a bell in a church at midnight. Martha didn't ask more, didn't cry, didn't curse. She stood, pulled Daniel's second rifle from the wall. Then she opened the cabinet, pulled out a small tin box, and handed it to Clara. "If I don't come back." Mine. No, if I don't, you take the others. You ride to Sheriff Lowe in Carson. You show him this box. What's in it? Proof, letters, witness names. He'll know what to do. Clara's chin trembled, but she nodded. Martha turned to Miriam. Can I trust you to get them there? Miriam squared her shoulders. You already know. She rode before the sun broke. Alone. With Daniel's rifle on her back, a knife in her boot, and nothing in her heart but steel. The trail to Split Ridge was a dry scar through the hills, the kind of path that eats hooves and shreds nerves. But she didn't stop, didn't blink. She reached the edge of the ridge as the sky turned gold. The cabin stood below, quiet, too quiet. No smoke from the chimney, no movement near the barn. She dismounted behind a thicket of pine and watched. That's when she saw him. Eldon Crowley. Standing in the doorway like he owned the whole world. He turned and said something over his shoulder. Then two men dragged Daniel out by the arms. His face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, his shirt torn, ribs showing through the dirt and bruises. Martha didn't wait. She stepped into the open. Eldon saw her first. His smile was immediate. Well, he called, look what the dust blew back. Martha didn't respond, just kept walking. You always did like making an entrance, he added, stepping down off the porch. His men raised rifles, but Eldon waved them off. Let her speak. Martha stopped 10 paces from him. Let him go. Eldon raised an eyebrow. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, only one of us leaves this hill. He laughed. You alone. She pulled the knife from her boot and drove it into the ground between them. Then she pulled the rifle and fired. The first bullet clipped the hat off the man holding Daniel. The second buried itself in the dirt between Eldon's feet. Chaos exploded. Daniel used the distraction to twist free, knocking one captor to the ground. Martha dropped one of the riflemen with a clean shot to the chest. Eldon ducked behind a post, cursing as Martha advanced. 2 more men came out of the barn, but she was faster. One dropped, screaming. The other turned and fled. Now it was just her, Daniel, and Eldon. Eldon stepped out slowly. No weapon, just rage. Fine, he growled. You want to end it, end it. Martha raised the rifle. He laughed again. You ain't got the gall. She didn't fire. Instead, she stepped forward and hit him with the butt of the rifle so hard his knees buckled. Then she leaned in close. You left me in the desert, she whispered. Now you get to die in the dirt. She didn't kill him. But when she dragged him, bloody and broken, to Sheriff Lowe's office 2 days later, she carried the tin box in one hand and Daniel's arm around her shoulders in the other. The trial was swift. The letters in the box, enough to ruin a senator. The witnesses who came forward, enough to bury Eldon alive. He'd stolen land, sold women, orchestrated false arrests, and when all that failed, he tried to kill the very people who had once called him family. The judge sentenced him to hang, and the crowd clapped when it happened. Weeks passed, then months. Spring deepened into summer. The ranch flourished. The garden yielded, the barn filled with new horses. Miriam married Lyle in a small ceremony behind the house. Clara stitched her own dress. Wesley read the vows. Daniel never fully recovered the use of his left arm, but he worked harder with his right to make up for it. And Martha, she finally stopped waiting for the next storm, because she'd already survived the worst of them. The sun over Dry Hollow never quite burned as hot again. Summer came gently, like it knew too well what had happened the year before and chose to move softer. Martha stepped out each morning with a deeper breath than the last, her hands still calloused, her eyes still sharp, but the fear that once lived in her ribs had thinned. Not disappeared, No, fear never disappeared when you'd walk through the kinds of nights she had, but it stopped being the only thing in her chest. Life, it turned out, didn't stop just because pain knocked the wind from it, and neither did children. Clara took to the garden like she'd been born with dirt under her nails, coaxing stubborn beans and late tomatoes out of the earth like magic. Wesley had grown taller, voice cracking in uneven bursts, his shoulders starting to square like Daniel's. Miriam stitched blankets for neighbors now and even laughed when the baby, still chubby-cheeked and bright-eyed, tried to chew on the edge of her sewing. Ezra didn't speak much, but his eyes were full of story, and he never let go of the little wooden rifle Micah had carved. Daniel rebuilt the porch himself, wouldn't let Martha help, not because he didn't think her strong enough, but because the act of building had become his way of healing. He'd sit out there some nights after supper, sanding the wood smooth, humming some tune only he remembered. She'd sit beside him sometimes, or just watch from the window, knowing better than to fill the silence that had grown comfortable between them. And yet peace has a funny way of looking like still water, until something stirs beneath. It started with the letter. Delivered by a rider whose horse looked half dead from the journey, stamped with a seal neither Daniel nor Martha recognized. He handed it over without a word, his eyes low, as if ashamed to have been sent. Martha opened it alone on the porch while the children were still inside. Her hands trembled halfway through the page. Daniel stepped out and froze when he saw her face. "What is it?" he asked, voice low. She handed him the letter, watched his eyes move over the ink, watched the heat rise in his cheeks. "They're trying to pardon him?" he asked, jaw tightening. "After everything?" "No," she said quietly, her voice clipped. "Not trying, they already did." Daniel lowered the page. "That judge." "Retired, replaced with a friend of Eldon's brother." A long silence. Then Daniel set the letter on the porch rail and stared out toward the horizon. Martha already knew what he was thinking. "We can't run," she said. "I wasn't planning to." That night they told the children. Clara's face twisted with rage. Miriam wept silently. Wesley asked only one question: "Do we get to fight back this time?" "Yes," Martha said, "we do." They didn't know when Eldon would come, but they knew he would. A man like him didn't take defeat well, especially not from the woman he'd tried to bury and the man he'd failed to kill. So they prepared. Daniel spent his mornings reinforcing the barn and the root cellar, turning both into fallback shelters. Wesley helped nail boards over windows and dig shallow foxholes along the fence line. Clara rode to town every third day to buy supplies and send word to the few friends they trusted, men and women who remembered what Eldon had done and wouldn't turn a blind eye just because the law decided to forget. Martha cleaned the rifles. She taught Clara how to shoot from a window, how to breathe through the trigger pull, taught Wesley where to hide the spare ammunition, taught Miriam how to listen for riders, how to spot dust on the trail that didn't belong to wind. And every night, she lay beside Daniel and waited for the sound that would mean the waiting was over. It came in the form of thunder without clouds. Midnight hooves many. Martha rose from bed without a word. Daniel followed. They woke the children quietly. Clara took Ezra to the cellar, clutching him against her chest. Miriam kissed Wesley's forehead and pulled him close. He held her hand all the way to the barn, where they hid among the hay bales. Daniel loaded the last shell into the rifle and passed it to Martha. He kept the other for himself. Then they waited. The knock didn't come. Only the voice, drawled lazy, like a snake uncoiling. "Martha DeWitt, Daniel Harper, come on out now. Let's not make this ugly." She stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, lantern beside her. Daniel stood behind. Eldon Crowley rode forward through the dark like he belonged there, like he'd never left. He wore a different coat, fancier maybe, but the face was the same, smug, narrow-eyed, slicked with the sweat of a man who'd bought his second chance with silver. "You got some gall," Martha said, leveling the rifle. "I got some rights," Eldon replied, grinning. "Judge says I'm a free man, my land, my cattle, my name cleared, and your little trial stunt. Well, looks like you'll be the ones answering questions now." "You left me to die," she said flatly. "Don't remember it that way," he drawled. "You sold women, burned homes, bribed sheriffs. Funny what memory does under pressure." Martha did lower the gun. Behind Eldon, 5 men sat their horses, faces half-shadowed, guns visible. "You planning to shoot me, Martha?" Eldon said, all mockery now. "With your kids watching, make yourself a widow again." "You come any closer," Daniel said, stepping up beside her, "and they won't be watching. They'll be shooting." Eldon chuckled, then flicked a finger. The first shot missed. Not by much. The porch rail splintered as Martha dove sideways, landing hard on her shoulder. Daniel returned fire. One rider fell screaming from his horse. Then it was chaos. Bullets ripped through the porch. One struck the lantern, sending flame arcing across the steps. Smoke rose fast. Daniel shouted for her to move, but Martha was already crawling toward the edge, rifle in hand. From the barn, 2 sharp cracks rang out. Wesley, steady and sure, took down another rider. Clara emerged from the cellar, dragging a small revolver, eyes wild but focused. Miriam followed, holding Ezra close and whispering prayers between clenched teeth. Daniel leapt from the porch, firing into the dark. Eldon's men scattered. But the fire spread faster. The porch caught, the roof above it. Flames crawled up the side of the house like claws. "We have to pull back," Martha shouted. Daniel nodded, grabbing her hand. Together they fell back toward the barn. Clara met them halfway, covered in soot but still holding the revolver. "They're circling," she yelled, trying to get around the back. "Hold the line," Daniel shouted. But they were already surrounded. The next minutes were smoke, gunfire, and blurred motion. Wesley held the barn doors with Micah's rifle. Clara stayed at the side window, ducking between shots. Martha moved between them, checking rounds, barking orders. Daniel fought like a man who'd known peace once but had long since buried it. Then through the smoke, a figure broke through. Eldon. He wasn't on horseback now. He came on foot, gun drawn, boots crunching ash. Martha stepped into the yard. He raised his weapon. So did she. Then, a shot. But not hers. Eldon froze. Blood bloomed at his chest. He dropped to his knees. Behind him stood Wesley. Gun shaking, face white but standing tall. Eldon's mouth opened once, then he toppled. The silence after was the loudest thing Martha had ever heard. She didn't run to Wesley. Didn't collapse. She walked to Eldon's body, looked down, spoke softly. Not in the dirt, not like you wanted, but still alone. Daniel joined her, Clara too. Even Ezra toddled out, soot on his cheeks. Together they watched the fire die. It took days to put the house out. Weeks to rebuild. Months to rest. But no one left. No one fled. Sheriff Lowe rode in a week later with 10 men and a letter from the governor, this time one that couldn't be bought. The pardon was rescinded. Eldon's allies scattered. Justice, once slippery, finally stuck. And Dry Hollow lived again. Martha didn't celebrate. She cooked dinner. She bathed the baby. She sat on the rebuilt porch with Daniel and watched the wind dance across the field. And when Clara brought out a cake, burnt a little on the bottom but filled with pride, they all sang softly under the stars. Ezra clapped. Miriam cried. Wesley stood quiet, hands on his belt, and smiled. Because even after all that smoke, all that fire, What remained was simple. They were still together, still breathing, still standing. And that was enough. The wind moved gentle through the grass that morning. Martha stood where the old porch had once burned, her arms folded, Ezra's hand in hers. Behind her, laughter trickled from the barn, Daniel fixing a hinge, Wesley telling Clara she hammered crooked. Miriam sang to the baby as she swept, her voice soft as morning light. There were scars on the land, yes, scars in their bones too, but they'd been stitched with hands that stayed, with love that endured when the world tried to rip it apart. Martha closed her eyes, breathing deep. For once there was no fear, no boot in the distance, no dust trail bringing dread, just sky, earth, and the sound of her family building a life. She bent, scooped up Ezra, and kissed his head. "Let's go home," she whispered, even though they already were. And in that simple, quiet truth she knew they'd won. Not by blood, not by fire, but by choosing to live, together, always.